Welcome to House Calls, the podcast.
Hey, Ty. Thanks for inviting me to House Calls, the podcast.
So did you watch a little football yesterday?
I did. It was a lot of football this weekend.
It is a tough go of Commander Washington quarterbacks.
It's not been pretty, but we are all on the SMU bandwagon once again.
Yes, they were looking good. And I think I think they might have the best uniforms in college football.
They have the best colors,
Yeah.
no doubt.
I do love the Ole Miss powder blue uniforms, but the SMU uniforms are great.
Yep.
So
yeah, no, it's not a good time to be a Commanders fan, but we've been here before, but we'll be back.
So I was thinking a little bit about football
Okay.
and the concept of do your job. So I
Okay.
think we've all heard the mantra, do your job. Bill Belichick and the Patriots are famous for it. And we're not going to be a sports talk show tonight,
Thank
but
goodness.
some would argue he's the greatest coach ever in college football. And it's very also the mantra of Nick Saban and Alabama football.
Correct.
Okay? So the reason I started thinking about it is because we're always telling people like, do all these different things. And the thing about do your job, it means do your job, not the guy next to you's job. So I think from football terms, the easiest way to explain that is you're the outside linebacker. If you play for Bill Belichick and he says you're supposed to set the edge or make sure nobody can run around you, and you try to cut inside to sack the quarterback to be the star, and the running back runs around the corner, you're going to be fired because you did not do your job, right?
Yep.
So that applies to your life also. So in life, you can spread yourself too thin. You're trying
Sure.
to do it all. You're trying to be the superstar and you're not doing your job, right?
Yep.
But your job, I'm not saying your occupation. I'm saying the job. And the great thing about it is that in life, you get to choose what your job is. Whereas if you play for the Patriots, Bill Belichick tells you what your job is. Or if you play for Bama, Nick Saban used to tell you what your job is. But in life, you determine what your job is. And
Yes.
so what I mean though is like your job, like your number one priority might to be a dad or to be a husband or to be a podcast editor, right?
Right. Yep.
So,
A lot of different roles. Yep.
so isn't that one of our messages is telling people like to think about these big questions and be like, so what is your job? Like, what are your top priorities? And your job might actually be, if you're young, trying to figure out what your occupation is going to be and having an occupation that you enjoy. If you're middle age, you might be looking for a transition occupation or new hobbies. And if you're retired, you should be asking yourself, I'm no longer working. What is my job?
You should always have a job, a goal of something to be working towards. Yep.
Yes. So that's my big concept I just want to put out there for people today.
It's out there.
Since it is the book month or book fall or whatever our reading challenge, a book I read, I think probably like 43 years ago was Gail Sayers's book, I Am Third. And in I Am Third, he basically says, number one is God. Number two is his family. And number three is him. I am third. And God can be your faith. Obviously, your family can be your spouse and your kids or your grandkids or your extended family. And then he always put himself behind. And it makes me think like, okay, his job was number one priority was his faith or his family was number two. And you can arrange things however you want. But I think it is something to be like, hey, you're a young person or you're at a transition, write it down or have it in your mind. I mean, you're gonna have a better job hitting the targets if you're aiming.
So
This is really
that's-
heavy, right?
Yeah. So the soapbox that you're on, I mean,
Yes.
does it come with the podcast earphones? Because I did not get that,
Yes.
but I hear what you're saying, and it is good to have a job, good to have a focus in everything that you do. You just got to figure out what your focus is and commit to it.
So tonight we're super excited because we're going to be interviewing Gus Pichard, who is a retired interventional cardiologist. And I do think that some of these concepts that we talk about, he's going to be great at because um, a lot of our listeners are probably not going to end up being interventional cardiologists. A lot of them probably are not going to become doctors. A lot of them are interested in health. But I think that when you listen to a podcast or you listen to somebody like Gus, there's a lot of life lessons I think we're going to get. And I
Yes.
think he's going to talk about teamwork, and he's not talking about sports teamwork. He's talking about the medical team that he worked within. I think we're gonna learn about things like what happens when the team doesn't agree on everything. How do you move forward? We're
Right.
gonna, he's
How to
clearly an
disagree.
expert,
Yep.
so we're gonna learn about dealing with other experts when maybe the opinions don't agree.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot. And please don't embarrass me and ask him about Grey's Anatomy and some stuff that you saw on there, because I know that's where you get a lot of your medical questions. So please don't embarrass us.
I will try not to embarrass you.
That'd be
And he's
great.
also a very active grandfather, so maybe get
Very.
into that a little bit. And then finally, a little bit of the kind of mind body connection, if we can get into a little bit of that.
He's a wealth of knowledge in a lot of different areas, and he has a lot of good stuff to share with us. So I'm looking forward to it.
So I'm not going to embarrass you by making a bunch of sports analogies and TV analogies, but can you please like act like you have some medical knowledge? It's episode 50. Like I'm really trying to get you at least like some kind of medical assistant degree.
I should. I don't have one yet. How many more hours of this do I have to put up with? I mean, I know people that become scrub nurses a quicker time than this is taken.
Yes. Yeah. But you're not as quick of a learner as she
That's
is.
true. That's
So.
true. All right. So let's get ready to talk to Dr. Gus Pichard. Hey, everybody. Welcome to a new edition of House Calls, the podcast. Ty and I are very lucky to get to talk to Dr. Gus Pichard. Gus is a cardiologist, retired cardiologist, and Ty's jumping in there and wants to tell me exactly what kind of cardiologist he is, but it's more about the intervention of heart disease and things along that nature. But I probably butchered that tremendously.
I think
But
you
if
did
I,
a great job,
okay,
but I think we need to let Gus explain how he became interested in medicine, and he was at the forefront of, I believe, interventional cardiology. I want to sit back and listen. I'm somewhat intimidated because you both told me I should not be wearing a hat inside, and that Gene Waldron will not be happy with me. But I just finished working out. My hair is so poofed up that my wife told me to put a hat on. In my
uh,
defense,
I think that was another way, Gus, for him to brag that he has hair that does poof up. But anyhow,
Makes you look very young.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Gus, so where did you grow up? And why don't you give us a little bit, the early years?
So I grew up in Santiago, Chile, a French family. My father was the son of a French couple. My father was a cardiologist himself.
Hmm.
And while in high school, of course, you're choosing what you're going to do later. In Chile, there's no college. It's like Europe. You go straight from high school to the professional university. And my choice was to be a teacher because I thought that's a way you can best help the world because you can teach young minds good principles and good starting in life. But the priest in my school said, "Guys, that's wonderful, but you can help more if you go to something like medicine. Teachers these days have very limited access to wide populations. You're smart, just go to medicine." So that's how I ended up. And I was open to anything. Uh, I could have been a lawyer, I could have been in Chile, being an agronomist is very big because most families have big farms and that's part of life there. And I love that too. My grandfather had a big farm, so I grew up half the summer we spent in the farm and did all kinds of activities in the farm. Animals, crops, hiking, swimming in the river, etc. And the other half was at the beach.
That's pretty
At
good
any
living.
rate,
That's pretty good
so I went to
stuff.
medicine and I was in 7 years of medical school. It was a small class. It was 35 of us that spent
In
7 years
in
together
Chile.
in Chile, the Catholic University of Chile. So the friendships that we developed are amazing. I still have my best friend in life is a classmate from medical school. And we had a great class, very smart people and very open to have great relationships.
Was the cardiology path, was that a natural
So
progression for you
because
because of
my
your
father
father?
was a distinguished cardiologist in Chile, he taught my close group of friends and myself a lot of cardiology. So very often we knew more cardiology than whoever was the teacher assistant teaching us. And in some way, when I graduated, when Chile was a program, you had to go 2 years to serve areas that didn't have much medicine. But unknown to me, I got an award as the best student in medical school for the year in Chile. And the prize was that I didn't have to go to the small towns. I could start a fellowship right away. And a cardiology fellowship opened up, so I took that, and I did not go to a small town, which meant I lost a lot of my friends, which did go to the small towns. But that's how I studied cardiology. And I was doing very happily a cardiology fellowship there, was internal medicine cardiology. And this I wanted to mention. On Fridays I did animal work with rabbits' hearts. And we're doing electrophysiology, measuring the electrical action of the cells of the heart. And I'm only into this, doing it. And someone comes and says, Gus, you have a call from the United States. So, wow. I go there. It was Mason Sones, the head of the Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah.
He said, Gus, I want you to come to the Cleveland Clinic in 3 weeks. I said, no. I'm very happy in Chile. I have no intention to go to America. Thank you so much for the kind offer. But no, I'm not interested. And he said, well, you cannot say no. Go talk to your chief and talk to your dad and call me back on Monday. This was on a Friday. And the Cleveland Clinic at that time was the only place in the US doing coronary bypass surgery. That's why it was invented.
So what year was this?
This was 1971.
Okay.
You guys were
And
not born yet.
how did they find you?
I had met him because I did a tour of medical sites in the US with a heart surgeon from my medical school, and I spent a week at his hospital. And he was a guy who would come in at 7 a.m. and stay there until midnight. And as a guest, I stayed with him until midnight every day, seeing what he was doing. So that's how we met. At any rate, my father, my chief said, Gus, you have to go. So there, in 3 weeks, I was packing my suitcase and moving to Cleveland for an assignment of 6 months. And the message for young people that listen to this is that I'm grateful in some way I was open to make a shift in life. When life suddenly opened a new road for me, traditionally I should have said, no, I'm here. I'm not doing something different. I know nothing about that. But I looked at it, I listened to my superiors, and I made that shift. And I'm glad I did, because as we'll talk, a new life opened up for me.
Did your
So
father want you to go to America, or was he interested in you maybe joining his practice and treating? Was he retired at this point, or was he still working? Was there
no,
anything where you hoped to work together?
he was at the peak of his career. He was president of the Chilean College of Cardiology, was very involved in everything. But he always gave me total freedom. But of interest, he was French. So anytime he went for postgraduate training, he went to France.
Okay.
And he looked at Americans, said, well, Americans, it's a new culture there. And he wasn't very fond of America. He would always prefer Europe.
Okay.
So that's the household I grew up in. So I had no special attraction to come to America.
Okay.
And I came to the Cleveland Clinic for the 6-month assignment, and I find myself in a 2-year fellowship. And I had no choice. So you go here, and they put me on a system. And I took it, and I did it. Cleveland Clinic was very exciting. As I said, it was doing things that no one else was doing. The chief that had called me, Mason Sones, had invented coronary angiography. That's cardiac catheterization. That's taking pictures of the arteries in the heart. It's a routine procedure now through a catheter. And that didn't exist before. So he himself was a true master and a leader and an inventor.
And now I thought I heard maybe that when he first did it, it like wasn't approved. So he did it on himself with just him and his nurse, or is that a different story?
Very, very good. So he developed this new technique, and everybody criticized him. And someone sued him for human experimentation. Says you have no right to do that. That's too dangerous. People could die. and you cannot do human experimentation. So they did a legal suit. He was going to go to prison. And what he did a cardiac catheterization on his associate, Earl Shirey. And Earl Shirey, his partner, did a catheterization on him. And they brought this to court as evidence that this was not something dangerous. They were doing it on themselves.
What year was this?
So that was in the late 60s.
Okay, so literally only 4 to 5 years before you got there.
Exactly.
Okay.
Holy cow. So you
And
were right at
most
the very
of the
beginning.
big cardiology sites in America thought this was crazy. It should never be done. And when a patient had a heart attack, they were treated, said, well, we'll see, pray to God, and if you live, you live. You don't live, you don't live. And nothing existed considered to look into the arteries. What was a heart attack? It was thanks to Mason-Sons discovery that heart attacks today are treated, with stents and so on. And you prevent the heart damage. So
Wow.
Cleveland Clinic, I was there doing my fellowship, and I was determined to get back to Chile. It was 20 fellows, mostly from the US, but also from Europe, from Asia, from South America. Great guys. And most of them wanted to stay in America to make money. And I prevailed, convincing all my co-fellows to go back to their countries. And my message was, we need to get back and teach them what we learned at this great place. Medicine is not a business, medicine is a service. You'll do fine wherever you go. And I convinced them all to get back to their countries. And I was very happy about that role. However, what happened to me was, and the Cleveland Clinic offered me a job to stay there on faculty. And I said, I'm sorry, but I'm going back to my country. But my current wife, Nancy Prendergast, came into the picture. And the story is that our parents had met in the honeymoon. Oh, Nancy's on the next door. Oh,
Don't-
and
It's
I
like
had
Bill
spent one of
Belichick's
my
girlfriend.
Chilean summers in the Prendergast family in Rhode Island. And so I had met, Nancy was 13, I was 18, but she was 107. I spent those 2 months with her siblings my age. But when I came to Cleveland for the fellowship, I stopped at the Prendergast family in Rhode Island.
No.
And Nancy was now 21, and she was beautiful and smart and active and dynamic. And I said, oh, this is it. So through my time in Cleveland, we started a relationship. Eventually, she transferred to law school to Cleveland, and we got engaged 6 weeks later and got married a year later.
Oh, wow.
But that made it that Nancy had one more year of law school when I finished my fellowship. So we decided to stay one more year in the US until she would graduate to then go to Chile. And I went to the chief of the Cleveland Clinic, Mason-Sons, and I said, well, you had offered me a job, and now I need it. He said, yes, already give it away. You told me you were not staying. But that's okay. I'll make spot for you. So I stayed at the clinic. And you wanted to say something? So that's how I started cardiology. And then I stayed at the clinic and I became part of the faculty. I was teaching a lot of fellows from all over the world. I had the good fortune to have talent in my hands. So I was very good at doing the procedures. I was very safe and very rapid. And the patients had great outcomes. And it was a great time in a great institution.
So back then, and I just want to kind of clarify. So there's cardiologists, which is basically you're treating the heart with medicine, and then there was the cardiac surgeons who are opening up the heart and doing bypasses, and then there's interventional cardiology, and that you were there at the forefront. It just had been invented a few years before. So what were you able to do there? And then we'll get in later, like what can be done now. But like in your early years, were you limited by the technology, or did the technology happen very rapidly?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Thais. So interventional cardiology did not exist then. So what we did in the catheterization laboratory, we did an angiogram of the arteries, and we find certain types of blockages. We decided whether to give the patient medicines or send them for bypass surgery. And bypass surgery, as I said, was brand new. If I can tell a brief story, as a fellow, I wrote an abstract. That's a presentation at a national meeting, saying that when there was a blockage in the main artery of the heart, called the left main artery, surgery did better than medicines. And I was a young fellow. I barely spoke English. And I was presented it in the main arena of this American Heart Association meeting, where there would be thousands of people. So I have to give credit to Nancy, my wife, who practiced with me all night so they could understand what I was saying. And I'm one of those who always presented at the national meetings speaking out without reading. I never believed in reading material. So at any rate, she allowed me to I presented the data, and everybody got up and said, "You cannot say that. Bypass surgery is no good. You don't save anyone. A lot of people die. You have no right to show this in public. Don't ever publish it. We don't believe anything that you say." And a guy was sitting in the first row, this huge arena, and came up the podium and say, "May I have your microphone, please?" I said, "Yep." I gave him the mic. He was the chief of heart surgery at Harvard, Dr. Dwight Harkin. And he said, "You guys," address the public, "you guys sit down, stop complaining, take notes. This kid is presenting the most important data of this entire meeting."
Wow.
And you can imagine how I felt, literally a
Sure.
little kid presenting this stuff. And of course, very soon thereafter, bypass surgery was proven to be the best solution for this kind of disease. But that was my first experience in front of an American audience,
Oh,
and it was very exciting.
absolutely.
It's such an interesting time because you have the experts who are all arguing, but it's newfound technology. So in reality, nobody's an expert. You have to rely on the data as the data comes in those first couple of years. And that's something that Matt and I talk about all the time is that sometimes experts don't agree with each other, but in medicine, people tend to be pretty reasonable. Like reasonable people can disagree, but they're not always very nice in those big meetings when they're attacking the person at the podium.
And one of the lessons that, as I look back at it, to the young people is if the Cleveland Clinic had had an outstanding database from the very beginning, bypass surgery would have been approved much earlier. But in those years, they have a simple database. They kept a record of every patient with pictures of the arteries, but no true database. So my message to the young in everything in life, keep track of everything you do, everything you observe. Today you put it in Excel or somewhere. It's so easy. So years later you can document what your impression is about some fact in life.
How did things take off from doing angiography to more intervention where you got to the point where you're putting stents in and you're doing valve thing procedures? How does that take off and how long did it take?
So I was a young rising, I don't like to call it star because I don't like to brag, but at the Cleveland Clinic. But Nancy, who now was a lawyer, said to me, Gus, Cleveland, I haven't seen sunshine in over 100 days. And I want us to go back east. And that started a whole process. I ended up being director of the cath lab at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. The team from Harvard had moved from Boston to New York, and they were coming. And they invited me to work to run their cath lab. So I did that. While there, a Swiss guy invented a balloon to open up the blockage in the artery of the heart, something called angioplasty, coronary angioplasty. No one ever had been inside of an artery doing something to it, trying to open a blockage. And this is, if you think of stepping on foam, and you flattened up, and the type of foam that wouldn't come back up, it stays flat. That's what this balloon would do into the artery. So put a balloon inside of the artery, open the balloon, and the area that had been blocked now has good room for the blood flow to go through. So I started doing that at Mount Sinai. Go ahead, Ty.
So my curiosity is, so I'm assuming when before he came out with his trying it on humans, he did it on animals. And my question that popped to my mind is, do animals have heart disease to
So
practice on? Because my worry would be you'd be putting a balloon in there. My first thought, if I didn't know it was possible, if I was around in the 70s, would the artery burst and then you have a bleeding arteries?
so great question, Ty. So no, he didn't do animals. He did the legs in patients because the legs
Oh,
get blocked
yeah.
with the same type of blockage.
I
And
thought
then there's
that's
no
what I was
danger
going to guess. Yeah.
because traditionally they would operate for that. So if the balloon didn't work, they would do surgery.
Okay.
And that he proved it was right. But at Mount Sinai, I asked permission to go to Switzerland to the first course where this guy was teaching the technique. And Mount Sinai, a very conservative institution, said, no, guys, you cannot go. This is too new. There's no proof. So what I did, I brought the balloon to the animal lab. And although the animals have no blockages, I worked with the balloon in the arteries, and then I looked at the muscle in the heart where the artery was going to, and did pathology with a microscope, studied the artery and studied the muscle, and proved that there was no damage. And that allowed me then to bring into patients very quickly. And I was one of the first ones in the US to be doing this technique. Now, when you enter the arteries of the heart, that's no longer cardiology, that's what became interventional cardiology, because you are intervening into the heart itself. And so it all started with that balloon. So I was at Sinai there for 5-7 years. I created the catheterization laboratories. I didn't have one before. I had an amazing time. It was a very academic institution. We had lots of academic meetings. Every day we had a meeting in the morning, 7 to 8, where we discussed our patients. If I had read a paper the night before in a journal, I brought it up and explained to everybody this was new knowledge or something. And everybody interacted. So we learned so much. And every day we had a meeting. One was cardiology, one was sonography, echocardiography, one was electrophysiology. So after those 5 to 7 years I was there, I came up much more of an academician and able to be a good teacher. Then I went on sabbatical to Chile to teach at the university where I had learned in America. And I was very fortunate. Nancy got a job in Chile as the international lawyer for the biggest bank in Chile, because at that time Chile was growing at great speed. There were a lot of countries making loans to Chile to make money. And the Chilean lawyers did not understand the international law for loans, and Nancy was a bank lawyer. So she was able to support the family. She had a good salary. And me and a sabbatical, I made like $80 a month or a year, I forget. So we spent there 18 months, and I was able to bring angioplasty, interventional cardiology, to Chile. I was able to start a research program at the university. I was able to start a new procedure using a balloon for a valve in the heart. We all have 4 valves in the heart, and rheumatic heart disease would often take the mitral valve. And people with rheumatic heart disease, there was a lot of that in Chile, would need heart surgery to fix that. And a new procedure had come through a friend of mine in France to use a balloon instead of heart surgery. So I brought that procedure to Chile. And that was great there because it was mostly young ladies with this disease now could have a 1-hour procedure instead of open heart surgery.
But to make that story relevant to Matt, just how amazing that technology is, my grandmother died of rheumatic heart disease when she was, I think, 25 or 26 years old. So obviously I never knew her. My dad barely knew her, but that's what happened. Young women would die of it. So she would have died in, I guess, the early 40s. To show that technology that now you can get a heart catheterization and fix it is just amazing. And think about all the
Absolutely.
lives that have been saved.
Thank you, Ty, for that story. Yes, young ladies would die. And if they got pregnant and didn't know they had rheumatic heart disease, often the baby and the mom would die. It was
Oof.
a devastating disease.
Mhm.
And of interest, and it's to all of us to understand how history is, rheumatic heart disease has disappeared around the world. Asia, Africa, uh, is a disease that's no longer around. Very rare to see a case. I was in Africa 2 weeks ago lecturing and asked about that and said, "Ah, we don't see anymore people with rheumatic heart disease."
Huh.
But that's a different subject. So being in Chile, uh, Nancy and I talked about where we're going to go back because we had mixed feelings about New York. We knew New York was the best of the best for everything. Food, theater, museums, everything was the best. But being in Chile, we thought, this must be what an addiction is like. It's so good, and you cannot do without it. I said, that's what New York feels like. We cannot go anywhere else because everything else is, lesser. But understanding that it was the mentality of an addicted uh, person, we said, let's look at the options. And I was very fortunate to be offered a position in Washington. This was a hospital that was kind of a community hospital, and cardiology was very small. But the chief was the nicest person ever. And as I interviewed around the country, I met him. And I said, this is something special. I can work with him and I can develop something. So we came to Washington. His name was Joseph Lindsay, an amazing leader in that he encouraged everybody else to develop their own talents without getting in between and trusting his team. So he allowed me to grow there. And when I came, there was no research, there was very little activity. And the catheterization laboratories, that's where these catheterizations and angioplasties are done, had a team that was very dysfunctional. The physicians were fighting among themselves, they were in private practice. The technicians had terrible fights. So they did 3, 4 patients a day. It took them from 9 a.m. until 6 p.m. to do that.
And
And
Gus, I'm sorry, what were they fighting over? Techniques, procedures, like best course of
yeah, great
action?
question. All of it. They were in competing private practices. So whatever John did, Mike thought was wrong, and Peter criticized him. And there was that kind of very antagonistic attitude.
And now
And
you have the antagonistic attitude between the competing interventional cardiologists. Then do you add the cardiologists who are treating with medicine and the heart surgeons all arguing over you didn't send this for surgery quick enough, or this should have been a bypass and you tried to do a balloon angioplasty, or they did a bypass and you're like, I could have done that with a balloon angioplasty. Was it like that kind of competition, or did those outer groups get along?
it was mostly among the outer groups and the ones coming in to do the procedures. The heart surgeons were spared this time.
Okay.
So when they were needed, they were called in and there was no issue there. But I don't know why. I quickly realized this was not right. And I started talking to them and giving them the example. So soon after I arrived, they started criticizing me. And I never entered this dilemma, this dialogue. I just kept doing my good work. And every time they were doing a procedure and not being successful, I put my gloves on, went in, and did it for them successfully. So suddenly I started realizing, wow, this guy is helping us instead of criticizing us. And then they realized I was helping all of them. And if one of their patients hadn't come onto the table to have the procedure because the orderly hadn't brought him from the room, I would go to the room with a stretcher, put their patient on the table, and bring it to the cath lab. Says, wow, the director of the cath lab is pushing the stretcher to bring a patient. This is different. And it's amazing how quickly the spirit changed. and people started collaborating. Not like brothers yet, but they stopped the fighting. And with the technicians who were also very unpleasant with each other, I got them together and I said, now we're going to work as a family. You guys do the work. So you'll set the rules on how we run this laboratory. And I'm the chief, so I'm going to enforce the rules. But I'm not going to tell you what to do. We as a group are going to do it. We met weekly to set the new rules for the system. And instead of the 2 shifts, morning and afternoon, that ended at 9 p.m., I said, if we do those 4 patients in the morning, whenever you're finished, you go home and you get paid a full day. So someone criticized, I said, guys, you cannot do that. It's against your union rules. So I went to the president of the union and I explained to him. He said, yes, of course, you'll pay them a full day. Bless you. That's perfect. So quickly, the efficiency of the system got terrific. Quickly, we were doing 1,000 patients a year instead of like 80. And we were finishing at 4 p.m. And everybody was happy. Everybody was collaborating. I started a Thanksgiving Day for the workers, for the team. So I closed the labs except for emergencies. And everybody brought in food. And then we all hung together. We held hands. We prayed. We sang. Everybody said thanks for what they were thankful in life. And then we ate like kings. And this set up as a different path for the system. Go ahead, Ty.
So when you get to you mentioned 1,000, 1,000 cats a year. What percentage of those are elective, meaning that it's a heart, so you got to get it done quickly, but elective meaning like you have 48 hours to a week to get them done, and how many of them are people coming in the middle of the night? Because I do have questions sometimes about some of the work-life balance, and are you coming in the middle of the night all the time, or are you covering each
Great
sharing that
question.
role with the other doctors?
So initially, there were no emergencies or very exceptional because there was nothing to be done for them. There was still no interventional cardiology for heart attacks. So it was mostly diagnostic work. But occasionally, a patient would have a heart attack, be, low blood pressure, be in shock, and then we did a catheterization. But it was exceptionally rare in the middle of the night. And I was going to say something. It'll come back to me for the night. So the volume had grown tremendously. We were doing research. I had started a great angioplasty program. And now it's been 5, 6 years. And I was doing now 1,000 procedures myself. So I needed help. And the practitioners there, possibly rightfully, every time I had a great candidate to join me, they blocked it through the hospital. And because I was a hospital employee, they could do that. I guess they had a hidden fear that their practice would suffer, that I could take their patients. Although I have proven to them, they all had more patients now that I was running the system. But what I did 5, 6 years later, I went into practice myself, and the hospital kept me as a director of the system. And I had been asking myself now, why did I do that? I had a good intuition. I said, I'm going to hire the best associates in the country to join me, as opposed to the tradition, hire my fellows and me telling them what to do. And you should see how many of my colleagues said, Gus, you're crazy. You never hire people that are like you or better than you. And I said, no, I want people better than me or like me. And indeed, I was fortunate to get 3 other guys. One was the head of the NIH, one was the head of Georgetown, and another one. And within 3 years, we had created the group that was doing the most procedures in the world, were publishing the most scientific publications in the world, were giving the most lectures in the national meetings and presenting the most scientific data in the world. And the institution changed. People came from everywhere to see how we did it, to learn from us. And we started what's called a live course, where you do procedures and gets transmitted by a fiber optic to a big congress place, so everybody could learn how we did it. And that meeting was called TCT, which still exists. I was there last week in San Francisco. And quickly, that meeting had 10,000 cardiologists attending. And we were doing 15 or 20 live cases transmitted. And any new data in cardiology, any new science was presented at this national meeting. Last week, it was 13,000 of us from 148 countries
Wow.
attending this meeting. So it was a very exciting time. And that's when interventional cardiology exploded, because we had a lot of science connected to clinical work. We were fortunate to develop a lot of new devices to treat blockages in the heart and to treat valves that needed surgery.
That's
So
unbelievable. Everyone was able to, I would guess, have to check their egos to put together that super group. Everybody came in wanting the same goal. And so I would guess in your field, that's a lot of egos typically, but those guys, everyone was on the same page. So it was like, leave our egos in the car and
They
let's
all
get to
warned me.
work.
They said, guys, you're getting big egos. You're going to get out of the system quickly.
Right.
That's the way history is. But you know what? I set up what I call the 10 commandments for the group. And the first commandment was, we divide the income equally at the end of the year. And it was easy for me to do it because I was the one bringing in most of the income. So it was my decision to split it equally among 4. So they all went along with it easily. And then I said things like, we never accept money from companies that we do research with. Because traditionally, many cardiologists would buy stock in the companies I did research with because they knew it was going to be good. We'll accept stock options from the company beforehand. So I said, none of that's allowed in a group. And if we get paid for a consulting fee or to give a lecture, we don't keep it personally. We donate it to research. And I gave the example. I started donating my salary as director of the lab to research from day one. And that's what allowed that research group to grow exponentially and very fast. It was a very exciting time.
so on the teaching front, you're teaching at conferences and people are watching you remotely do the procedures, but you actually had fellows with you also, correct?
So we had a big fellowship program.
Uh-huh.
And because of the success and prestige of this group, the fellowship became also the best. So we had the best crop of fellows from the US and always had international fellows from Europe, Asia, and some from South America.
So your goal was not to hire them as part of your practice. Your goal was for them to take the knowledge to the rest of the country and the rest of the world.
Exactly.
Okay.
And my old age is so rewarding to find as I traveled that these former fellows are now chiefs of the systems all over the world.
Yeah.
And it's very exciting to see. We did a lot of sacrifices for the fellows, but it was a mission. And
Mhm.
again, one of the commandments was, we're here for service and for teaching. We're not here for business. Did I say business? No, no. Was here for,
Yeah.
we're not for business.
Yeah.
And that percolated through the system. And the fellows understood that. For our fellows, we had them do research 1 full year before joining the clinical work, which was something new, and extended their training for an extra year. But we wanted them to be, again, best in the world. And that allowed them to be several steps up as they became clinicians.
And to clarify what a fellow is they've finished med school, they finished their residency in internal medicine. Have they then finished a fellowship in cardiology and then they're doing interventional, or are they going straight to interventional from residency?
They do 3 years of cardiology, general
Okay.
cardiology, and then they come to interventional.
So it's a long road.
It's a long road.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to
What I
get at.
say, cardiology is a long road, but it's a beautiful specialty, like all of them in medicine.
Mhm.
Uh, Talking of which, I always said to my children, I said, in life, you can be anything. You can be a garbage collector, or you can be a big senator or a physician. As long as you become the best at it, you're fulfilling a mission, and you'll have joy, and you'll be happy. And that's true in medicine also, all specialties. You work
There
hard at it, you become the best, and you have the great joy of giving patients health again. And if you have the opportunity to teach others to do it equally.
there's a great song by Jimmy Buffett called "Because It's My Job," and it basically the first verse is a very happy street cleaner, the second verse is an unhappy banker, and the third verse is him who had a unique songwriting, and it was all about how they were each doing their job, and that the street sweeper was proud of what he was doing and wasn't worried about the money and was whistling while he worked because it was his job. So I'm going to
Beautiful.
share that with you.
Beautiful. Yes.
So we have discussed this before, and I know you've done studies on this when you were at when you were working. Is kind of the attitude of the mind body connection and kind of believing in your own healing. And I know you did some of those studies when you were in practice. How did that interest start, and how did that affect your cardiology practice?
I've been thinking, how did it all start? And I had to attribute it to my upbringing. I went to a Catholic high school, and those priests were true saints. And they were so inspiring that they put in me some seed of being open to that world beyond what you can touch. So they taught me to pray, they taught me to meditate, they taught us what they called it adoration. We would sit in the church or the school for 1 hour in silence, which I now is what we call, meditation or even pure mindfulness. So as I went through medicine and I saw people suffering and people getting better, I had part of me had an extra sensitivity, think it's a human being that's suffering, and part of me felt God is in that person. And I'm looking at God's suffering, and my mission is to bring health and bring peace to that person. So that kind of, it wasn't well delineated like that, but as I look back, it wasn't in my background. And as a youngster, Nancy and I started doing yoga. We did a lot of yoga. And early in life, I subscribed to the Yoga Journal, which every month had an article on philosophy. And through that, I learned about mostly, I guess, Hindu and yoga philosophy. And they talked about energy, and they talk about the mind and the body and so on. So at one point in Washington, we started a research protocol with Mitch Krukov, who was at Duke. We did it together, and Mimi Guarnieri from Scripps Clinic in San Diego. And the protocol was to give patients guided imagery. We would give them iPhones with music and a meditation before the procedure and after. So some were randomized to have this guided imagery, the most relaxing, spiritual, beautiful experience. Some were randomized to have prayer at a distance. So we had other people praying for them to do well with the procedure. So there were monks in Nepal, there were rabbis in the Jerusalem wall, there were nuns in a monastery in Georgia, there were monks. There were 5 sites. And we did the protocol, and we demonstrated that people that had this, let's call it a spiritual experience, had a much better medical experience. They had less pain, they required less medications through the procedure. They had a much more positive attitude to healing. And also, most important, the personnel in the hospital now was not treating patients at 17 or 20, they treated a human being that came for healing. So it changed the mood of the caregivers. It was a beautiful experience. So that was the first time that I brought something spiritual into this very busy, very active, dynamic catheterization laboratory holding area.
And did that take off?
And yes, there was a nun at Georgetown that was a certified person for healing touch. And I brought
Mhm.
her to train nurses to do healing touch. I took a training course in Frederick, Maryland for 3 days. I became a certified technician. By the way, Nancy did that with me also.
Okay.
And we started then informally doing healing touch on patients. And we initially once a week, this group that had been trained, we did healing touch on ourselves to maintain the skills, but we did it on patients. Um, so that was the early stages. I did this for 2, 3 years, but then the new era of medicine came up about. New administrators came, and nursing became a new career. There was a lot of turnover, and a trained nurse quickly went elsewhere. And the new nurses were working so hard. I call it like chicken with their head cut off, running around trying to take care of everything. That that program disappeared, unfortunately.
Okay.
Uh,
But you
I,
you still would practice it.
I was still practicing, and there were a few of us that were there doing it. I kept doing it, and I've seen through my many years on this amazing effects of healing touch, and it's based on all of the concept of the quantum world, that we are all energy, that we are all made of quantums. For those that don't know, in school I learned we're made of atoms, was the smallest particle, protons and electrons were smaller, and that was the smallest. Now we know protons and electrons are made of quantums, which are 80% vibration and 20% mass, and that proportion varies. Now, quantums are so small, they have no distance and they have no time. So quantums in Washington can affect quantums in Japan instantaneously. And that's why energy work can be done at a distance. You don't have to be physically present. The quantums are in communication. And the Nobel Prize last year in physics, or 2 years ago, was about this, was about how can quantums in Washington could affect the quantums in Japan. And the physical demonstration that the guy got the Nobel Prize. So anyway, energy work on the body is based on quantum world because we are made of pure quantums, just like nature, trees and plants and flowers and animals and insects, butterflies, and the planet. The planet is made of quantums and the other planets. So it's a universe of quantum energy. And if we are open to consider that this world of quantum energy is where we belong, we are part of that. And that quantum energy is transiently now within this body that they call gas. But according to that philosophy, gas is not the guy you're looking at. Gas is part of that other universal world of consciousness. And transiently, he's been expressed as this gas that we're talking with. But
I get
anyway,
it.
so if you access the world of energy, is pure love, that is innate, is untouched. There's no ill there. It's pure goodness, pure love. That's where God is. And you access some of that energy, you can bring in healing to patients that are suffering. That's a basic principle of this. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of world experts that have dedicated their lives to this, who've created, amazing evidence that this is true.
Well, and one of the really cool things about that is like the healers that I guess we would say maybe the ancient healers, they didn't have all the technology we have now, and they knew this, and they practiced it. And then maybe while we were gaining knowledge and statistics and technology, we kind of forgot it. And then practitioners like you kind of brought the two worlds together. Uh, and from a simple concept, if anybody thinks, "Oh, well, that's too far out there," well, just the simple belief is that if you can stop suffering and feel like you're healing and have a positive attitude, you are going to do better. And it doesn't no matter doesn't mean that your
Gonna-
illness is always curable, but you're going to be able to cope with it. The physician will be able to care more about the person. And when you're on the probability scale of what your outcome is going to be, you're going to have a more higher probability of a good outcome if you're believing in your own healing.
Even further, we physicians, we were taught we make a diagnosis based on the patient's symptoms and findings, and then we give a pill or a procedure. But they never taught us to sit with the patient, ask about their emotions, about the childhood trauma, and so on. So, like you mentioned, in the past, people knew this for thousands of years, and they healed disease. But the last 300 years of science and technology, they've erased it. Not only they've erased it, but those that did it, they called them witches, and they burned them, and they eliminate them. I said, that's all woo-woo, and is Lucifer trying to come through. But as you say, well, is coming now. So last week at this huge cardiology meeting, there was an entire session. There must have been 2,000 people in the audience, and they were presenting about inflammation, how inflammation is a cause of blockage in the arteries, blockages in the arteries to the brain, of the heart attack, of dementia, of autoimmune disease, and so on. So very scientific session. And then I stood up and I said, you guys have demonstrated nicely the role of inflammation, but none of you talked about what brings on inflammation. And that's what Ty knows, and we've learned together that inflammation is determined by factors that are new to us, like the state of the microbiome, the state of your mind, the amount of stress you're suffering, the amount of trauma that you're carrying within. They say that as we perform or act, 15% of our brain is what's acting and performing. 85% of our brain is subconscious. It's the stuff that's been stored there through generations and through our growing up. So any little childhood trauma that's stored there is in our brain and is active and is modifying the way we behave. And when those behaviors are in some way negative enough or burdensome enough to our constitution, the immune system picks it up, the hormonal system picks it up, the skeletal system picks it up, and then people get sick. But Thais taught us that you mentioned once that many, I think you said 80, 90% of back surgeries are probably not needed. That,
Well, 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 I don't know if I said that because we're going to have some back surgeons on, but I do think the
that's all right.
previous generation, I do think the previous generation, because of the new technology, was MRI. You had back pain, your MRI shows something abnormal, and and maybe you ended up with back surgery. Now we know that 80 to 90% of people above the age of 40 to 45 are going to have abnormal MRIs. And I feel like the next generation of back surgeons learn to really use evidence-based medicine, not just look at the MRI and say, oh, there's a problem here. Look at the MRI and say, okay, well, this problem can get better with time and heal itself. This problem can get better with intervention like an injection. And then certain problems they need surgery. But yes, I think the overall thing, I just didn't want to put a number on it.
That's the 80-90. Better
Yes.
explain. Thank you, Ty.
Yes.
So anyway, I find this is an exciting field. I spend a lot of
Mhm.
time now reading and learning about it because it's putting together the old traditions with the modern medicine, and they should be together. And when I talk to fellows, I tell them they need to treat the whole patient, not just the bones or the heart or the brain, and address the entire
Right.
patient. The likelihood of bringing in healing is much higher. What I read from the experts, like there's a big psychology department at Harvard. What they say in their podcast and their books, the people that heal from like intractable cancer, those cancers that come to the hospital, so it's too late, it's all over, go home and die. Some of those have miracle cures, and the tumors evaporate, disappear. a lot of those are the ones that address the disease from an emotional standpoint that will bring in healing. And there's a great guy, Stephen Levine, author, poet, and teacher, who dedicated his life to treat patients with cancer who are dying. And he wrote several books on who are the patients that, in spite of a dismal prognosis, that were dying, had what we call miracle cures. The tumors disappeared and they went back to normal life. And I always summarize his amazing books filled up with wisdom. I summarize that those people that had miracle cures had two characteristics. One, they sent love and mercy to their pain or their tumor or their illness, as opposed to rejection and fighting. So he says they stopped the war against the disease and they embraced the disease and started sending love to it. So that was the first characteristic I remember. And the second is they thought universally. When that person was having, let's say, terrible backache and semi-paralyzed legs, started thinking about the lady in Biafra who having terrible backaches and leg aches while she was trying to feed a baby, but because they was both starving, they had no milk and no breast, and they were both dying of starvation. And thought of the other one in Siberia, let's say, freezing cold and had no house, and having the same backache and leg ache. So they included the universe in their suffering, and they were asking for healing universally. And just fascinating stuff that they didn't teach us, Ty, in medical school.
No,
So,
no.
so Gus, here's my question, because I've been quiet for way too long and I've been thinking about this. But before you got on, Ty and I did a quick introduction, and this is going to surprise you, but Ty had a sports analogy. But what we were talking about was, what's your job and not your occupation. And we were talking about how people have different jobs and what's your priorities. And we were talking about people might have God, family, then themselves as the third one, or whatever your thing is that you are focused on. Your career is fascinating, but what do you think your job is? Because you're always learning, you're always teaching. What do you think your job is?
So the quick answer to that, my job was service.
Okay.
And service applied then to the medical field, to the family,
Yep.
and to those around me. And that made it easy. Like I was always very committed to my family. I worked very hard at the hospital. And I got up, early. I was in the hospital at 6 a.m., but I was always for dinner at home at 7 p.m. On weekends, the reason I didn't play golf or go sailing is because I had the passion for my family. I wanted to be with my wife and kids. And Saturday, Sunday was my only option. So on Saturday, Sundays, I also got up at 5 a.m. and I studied until whatever, 7, 8, 9, when the family would wake up. So I got my medical part done beforehand, but then I was fully committed to the family. And now that service was full of love and it was fun and it was exciting. And the hospital also, I was very fortunate that I loved what I did. I was excited. It was hard work, but uh, because I committed so much of my life to it, I was good at it. So I had rewarding results and I was fulfilling my need to be serving others.
Well, I think that's a beautiful answer. And just watching you, I know that's very true, because you're still doing that and you're still of service as a grandfather and your carpool duties as a grandfather,
I'm
which I
privileged to have
privileged. Yeah.
my kids inviting me to participate in their lives by doing carpool with the grandkids. And I feel so privileged to have that option. Not everybody gets it.
No, a lot of kids don't get to have that time with their grandparents or grandfather as well. So it's special for everybody. And I think you summed it up beautifully by saying it being of service. And
But there's an interesting aspect on that. My generation, I became 80 last week or last month, happily. So my
Congratulations.
generation, there are a lot of friends that are thinking, oh, the world is going wrong. Everything, nothing works. From the weather to the economy, everything is so bad. But we were the kids, the carpool, around a different perspective. These kids are prepared totally for the new world. They're, they're well prepared, they're excited, they have different views than we do. They'll be able to manage all the challenges and they'll do fine and they'll make this world a better world. They're more attuned to things like mindfulness we're talking about. They're more attuned to equality, they're more attuned to making the planet a better place to live in. And they're going to have fun doing it. They'll have their own
Great.
suffering like we did, but they'll be fine.
But
And
yeah,
I'm
they'll be fine.
grateful the kids, being with them, I learned that.
That's great. What a gift.
Well, I think we need to wrap up, and
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about a certain book because we did the reading challenge this month, and there was a book that I think you told me about, and it's called The Myth of Normal. And I just want to know briefly as our conclusion, as the instead of letting you choose the important book, I'm basically telling you which book I want you to just briefly say why that book is so important.
The Myth of Normal, highly recommended to all of you, any age, because it's this visionary, super smart guy, physician and psychologist from Vancouver, originally European, the family that went through the Holocaust. And he talks about how trauma is part of life for most human beings. He explains very clearly how trauma explains the behavior of adults. We were raised in a culture where if we had something we didn't like or made us suffer, we buried it. We didn't want to hear about it. And the language they use is say, we put it in the basement and lock the door so we wouldn't hear about it. But what he teaches is that in that basement, these feelings that were traumatized are like hot coals. They're red, they're vibrant, they're looking for an expression, they're looking to come out. They didn't become ashes. And all of us need to open the door to the basement and look at these hot coals, see why are they burning, and try to clear up that burning. And they said, everybody can do it. And by the way, some of these traumas are the causes of serious physical diseases. A lot of autoimmune disease, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, Sjogren's, others, are related to these emotions that are unhealed and that within a system are modifying the way an immune system functions. So Gabor Mate, the author of the book, The Myth of Normal, explains all of this very clearly. Another thing I learned from him is that many of us would say, oh, that we don't like that person. And some would even say, oh, he or she is a jerk. But Gabor Mate has taught us to think differently. You never say that person is a jerk. You say, what happened to that person that makes that person behave like that? What trauma is that person carrying within that's making him or her express itself what looks like a jerky attitude? So yes, highly recommend. Makes understand human beings much better. Would you add something? Because you've read it, Ty.
I loved it. I think you summed it up perfectly. I think it makes you maybe understand the world that you're in a little bit better, understand human beings a little bit better, and that means you're going to be more open to that nobody's perfect. And a lot of times there's reason for it, and just kind of looking into maybe some of those reasons is very helpful moving forward, where we all try to live together even though we may have different opinions about things. We have to learn to live together.
Right.
And that's our
That's
heavy
good.
ending.
That is a heavy ending. Ty, well done. Gus, thank you so much. What a gift that was to be able to spend some time with you and hear your thoughts and hear about your amazing life and all the good things you've been doing.
Thank
So
you so
thank
much
you.
for inviting me.
Yep.
That was great.